good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Swift Half with Snowdon with me, Christopher Snowdon, in which I talk to an interesting guest for half an hour. Near as damn it. I hope you've been well since the last time. It's been 2 weeks again. I've been very busy today with this whole tobacco report thing, which I'm going to get on to with today's guest, who I'm very excited to say is Joanna Williams. Joanna, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Chris. Really great to be with you, or it kind of feels a bit more appropriate. I should say cheers.
Cheers indeed, yes. Yeah, that's another thing that happened this week. We found out the minimum pricing was a complete failure. Do you see this?
I did. I have to say, wasn't surprised in the slightest. It must be one of the most predictable reports of recent times.
I was kind of surprised at who was saying it, because there's a whole evaluation, an official evaluation being run by what is now called Public Health Scotland. And various different people are doing it, various academics, most of whom I hadn't heard of. And the previous parts of the evaluation seemed pretty robust and quite good. And they also didn't really find any benefit from minimum pricing. This particular bit was always going to be at least co-authored by the people who'd done all the modeling from Sheffield University, and the whole minimum pricing policy was based on this modeling, and it was treated as gospel, even though it was really just finger in the air stuff. So I suspected that they would at least try and dress it up and try and find some benefits from it. But it was really stark, actually, in the end. They just concluded, look, the price obviously went up. Heavy drinkers no evidence we could find that heavy drinkers reduce their consumption. And in fact, there's quite a few unintended consequences, which is just what people like us have been saying the whole time.
So no, it's great to have it confirmed. And as you say, surprised perhaps that people have been prepared to confirm this so boldly. But yeah, good to know that what seems common sense really can actually be stated. Yeah.
And speaking of daft public health measures, this tobacco review today. So this came out from a guy who used to run Bernardo's, Javed Khan, I think his name is. And I wasn't expecting much from this, I must admit. I thought it would probably be just, parroting the usual stuff from the anti-smoking campaigners, and they were probably going to call for some kind of levy on the tobacco industry and maybe raise the smoking age. But actually he's gone way over that. So it's not just raising the smoking age, he wants to raise it every year so that people who are under 18 now will never be able to buy cigarettes. He wants to paint the cigarettes green or brown. He wants to put individual warnings on each cigarette. He wants to ban people smoking in their own home if they live in a council house. A real grab bag of extremist policies. But I know you've written about the idea of raising the age in particular. What's your take on that?
Well, I guess what concerns me is putting to one side the health risks or the pleasures in smoking is the message that we're sending young people about adulthood and what it actually means to be an adult nowadays. Because it seems to me quite fundamentally that being an adult is about being able to make choices for yourself about what you do and don't do with your own body. And this idea of raising the age seems to be another way of kind of prolonging adolescence, in effect, of kind of infantilizing a cohort of teenagers as they are right now, of saying, you don't think that when you get to age 18, you're going to be able to go into a shop and buy cigarettes for yourself, because you're not. We're going to delay it. You're going to carry on being an adolescent for that much longer. And I actually think that should kind of really give us pause for thought, because we're degrading the concept of adulthood. We're making it seem very unattractive. It's no longer seems to me to be a kind of aspirational state that young people aim for. When you hear kind of millennials joking about, oh, I'm adulting, or I've been doing some adulting this weekend, what they tend to be referring to is kind of doing something very boring, very mundane. I've had to sort out my internet banking or sort out my gas and electric bill or something like that. And that's what being an adult has become reduced to, kind of doing boring, mundane stuff. I'm not trying to suggest
that's
1
my
second.
Experience, yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to suggest, there's something incredibly aspirational about smoking, or that we should fetishize smoking as being what demarcates an adult from a kind of child. But I do think there's something concerning about, it's not just obviously in relation to smoking, but in many aspects of life, we're kind of prolonging adolescence. We're kind of taking away these marking points that say, now you're an adult, this is what it means. You can make these decisions for yourself.
I was looking at some of the kind of age limits for various different things, because I was trying to work out how many things actually do you have to wait until you're 21 for these days. It used to be, yeah, a few things. Voting, quite obviously. Homosexual age of consent was 21 until about 1994. Nowadays, there's almost nothing. Do you know what there is? You can't do till you're 21.
No.
Adopt a child and drive a HGV, and that is about it. Do you know how old you have to be to buy a lottery ticket?
18?
16.
16.
But it may well be going up to 18 soon. Driving obviously is 17. Do you know what age you have to be to give blood?
18, guessing.
17.
I don't know. 17.
Yeah, no, 17. It used to be, I think you could buy an air gun at 17, but now that's 18. Everything's basically coalescing around 18. You know,
it is.
Even kind of culturally, right? Because the 21st birthday many years ago, that was the big one, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And now 20, it's not really anything, particularly 21st, but that was a real coming of age. And now it's very much 18, and everything's basically gone to 18. Smoking age went up from 16 to 18. Lottery tickets probably, as I say, go up from 16 to 18. And yeah, and there's very little. I mean, there's one or two things you can do at 16, not that many, and there's almost nothing you have to wait till you're 21 for. So it'd be ironic, wouldn't it, if I don't know if maybe irony is not the right word, but if they have votes at 16 and put the smoking age to 21, it would be exactly the other way around than what it was before 1970.
Yeah. No, this is true. But what bothers me, is that before 1970, when 21 was the age of majority in the eyes of the law, young people, students especially, were really at the forefront of fighting back against this. They wanted the freedoms and the responsibilities that came with adulthood. Whereas nowadays, you look at particularly students on university campuses, it seems a lot of them are really arguing for the opposite. They're arguing, can we have more trigger warnings? Can we have more kind of petting zoos at exam time? Please treat us like children. Please don't make us be grown up. And, that I think that should just really, really worry us. Why is it that young people are not chomping at the bit saying, being an adult's a really aspirational thing and it's something that I'm striving to achieve? Why is it that they're saying, can you please take away all these bad things that might come with adulthood as well?
Can we just pause for 1 second? Emily, your light is going, the iris is going in and out a lot, so it's getting darker and lighter. Is there any way it's fading in and out a lot?
No, sorry. Are you doing video as well?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I mean, I've got a light here. The problem is I'm sat next to a window here. I mean, I could try and turn my laptop around a bit, see if that would help. Shall I do that?
Yeah, well, it's not doing it anymore. So maybe. I don't know why it was doing it.
Yeah, try that. Let me just move. I think it just does for some strange reason. I'm just
okay. Okay.
So if I turn the light off at the side, and I think it's
when you move. I think it's when you move. It seems.
I know. I'll try and keep very still.
Okay.
not easy for me.
I'll just come back off from that point you were just making and ask why that is, basically. Okay. So what's your answer, Joanna? Why do you think so many people want to live in this state of permanent sort of adolescence, or not even adolescence, childhood even?
Well, I kind of blame current crop of adults. I suppose I blame people my age and older rather than blaming young people themselves to too much of an extent. Like I was saying earlier, I think we've not made the prospect of adulthood exciting. We've kind of burdened people with this idea that it's tedious, boring at best, dangerous and risky at worst. And I think, in some ways we've degraded the concept of adulthood, and you could look at a lot of the things that I know are very dear to your heart, Chris, as to why this has happened. When you look at everything from kind of sugar taxes and alcohol minimum pricing, we just constantly berate everybody really about the risks. And I know from the very moment I leave my house to walk to the train station, if I'm commuting into London, before 9 o'clock in the morning, I'll have come across maybe 20 warnings, don't cross this yellow line, don't stand here, hold the handrail, don't do this, don't do that. and you think, I'm a kind of fully functioning, reasonably intelligent adult, and if I need to be given, if there's an assumption that I need to be given all these warnings and instructions about how to lead my life, then what we're really saying is that being an adult is not really, doesn't really count for much. You know, you still need to be told what to do all the time. And I think in that way of kind of degrading the whole concept of adulthood, we've not made it an attractive thing for young people. So when we then say to them, well, you know, okay, so you're studying theology, but we want to warn you that there might be some violence and there might be a crucifixion scene, you know, rather than kind of laughing and saying, well, actually, we want to know about the most exciting, the most interesting, the most dangerous bits about the world and kind of humanity's collective knowledge. You've got people kind of saying, good, protect us. This is what we've been used to. This is what we've come to expect.
And there's a lot of that stuff, you know, the warnings and the, you know, the constant reminders to not do this and do that. Is a lot of that kind of legal. It's a consequence of the health and safety laws and people basically covering their backs in case something bad happens. Because there are, let's face it, there are some stupid people around who will, you know, end up, you know, injuring themselves or whatever in some idiotic way. So is this just a kind of unintended consequence of the health and safety culture?
Well, I think it is, but I think it also goes hand in hand with a bigger cultural shift as well, away from people taking individual responsibility for their own lives. I mean, I think we've seen this kind of really ramped up over the past couple of years with the COVID rules and restrictions that we all had to live by. I mean, the most detailed rules, and people kind of nodded along, and not just nodded along, but lots of people said, yes, more, longer, harder, tougher, more restrictions, please. And this idea that we kind of defer responsibility for our own lives, or kind of looking after our children, looking after family members ourselves, to other people, essentially to the state, you know, that's something which we've not just got used to, but almost come to expect. And unfortunately, we live in a time, and you know, I guess maybe come on to talk about my book in a bit, but we live in a time where there is this kind of professional class of people who are all too ready and happy to enact this role of busybody and kind of play the health and safety officer role, if you like, get the clipboard and the pen, get the high-vis jacket on and tell us all what to do. And I think you've got those two things very much going hand in hand together. So in part it's legal, but I think it's also taps into just a really, really bigger cultural phenomenon.
And do you think this is something that a minority is imposing on the majority, or is it something that actually the majority quite like? I mean, with the lockdowns and stuff, you know, there was majority support, generally speaking, throughout that whole period for tougher restrictions rather than looser restrictions.
Well, I'd be a little bit careful. I mean, I think opinion posters do have a very good way of kind of soliciting the right response from people, if you like. Yeah. I'm always very skeptical about polls. And, you know, if somebody comes up to you with a clipboard and says, you know, do you want lockdown or do you want your grandma to die? Right, yeah. I think you're going to say, actually, I'd like a lockdown. Thank you very much, because people are nice, and that's the instinct that people have got. But if you actually look at how a lot of people behaved, I think there was some probably more pushback to the lockdown restrictions than you'd certainly guess from the news in response to Boris Johnson's Partygate. You know, you'd think everybody else in the country, you know, had been living in splendid isolation for the past 2 years. And clearly a lot of people were, and I don't want to undermine that or, you know, question why those people did that. But I also happen to know, and yeah, I'll be honest, speaking personally, lots of people didn't stick to the rules religiously. You know, we did our best. We protected ourselves and our loved ones. You know, we kind of went along with the spirit of it, but didn't necessarily religiously stick to the letter of what's going on. But, you know, I think the problem is, and I'm kind of in danger of going to be kind of quoting Kant, what is enlightenment here, but I think the more we get used to people making decisions for us, the more we get used to having all these health and safety regulations, these restrictions on what we can do, the more we come to expect it. And then at that point, kind of having to make decisions for ourselves, having to take responsibility, personal responsibility, does genuinely seem to be a very scary thing, because it's like a muscle. I think personal responsibility is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it it wastes away. And this is, I guess, my objection to things like raising the age for cigarettes, or the restrictions of the sin taxes, the sugar taxes, because it treats us like kids, walk 10,000 steps, eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetables. And we imbibe this in our kind of everyday consciousness. I don't want to know that I should walk 10,000 steps or eat 5 portions of fruit and veg. I've not deliberately gone out and looked for that information, but it's kind of lodged in my brain. I've kind of absorbed it by osmosis. And the more you absorb all these rules and kind of things that you should do, things that you shouldn't do, the more you come to expect that that's what life should be like. And the more you lose the capacity to then make those decisions for yourself.
Exactly. I mean, that was very much what John Stuart Mill said on Liberty. I don't know if he used that exact metaphor of like a muscle, but it was something very similar to that. And it's a point that always needs to be restated. I think that these things do require let's face it, people to make mistakes from time to time.
Exactly,
you will learn from your mistakes, but if you're having everything done for you, you'll no longer be capable of doing anything for yourself. I know I do want to get onto your book. That's the main reason I want to do it on the show. So you got a new book out called Why Woke Won.
How Woke Won.
Oh, sorry, How Woke Won. How Woke Won. Let's start at the beginning. The word woke, I gather, comes from sort of the civil rights movement in the 60s or so, or maybe even earlier.
Even earlier than that. So it's kind of 1920s, kind of pre-Jim Crow, even end of slavery in the US. And it was a kind of cultural slang in the Black community of the US as a very genuine warning from one Black person to another, to beware of police violence, to beware of Ku Klux Klan lynchings. It was very genuinely meant. But then that over kind of a period, well, I guess almost 100 years, that word's been appropriated by white progressives who are so quick to berate anybody who they accuse of cultural appropriation. Well, they've appropriated that word and they took it on board themselves. And it really took off in the way that we currently use it from about 2008 onwards, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it became a much more general sense of kind of be aware of social injustice, be sensitive and alert to inequalities, and kind of act in this very, I was going to say kind of politically correct way, but I think we've got to be a bit careful because it's obviously, and one of the gripes I've got with it is it's very authoritarian, it's very prescribed. It's a bit disingenuous when people say, oh, it just means being alert to social injustice. I mean, I kind of think that's a bit of bollocks, actually. What they really mean is be alert to the social injustices that we want you to be alert to and respond to them in the way that we set down is the appropriate way that you should kind of act when you see these injustices.
And do they still use the word woke? Because I only ever really see it when people are using it in a disparaging way. So has it gone out of fashion now amongst the people who are woke?
Yeah, it's really funny because, I mean, a lot of people who I would describe as being the most woke are the quickest people to turn around and say, no, we're not. There's no such thing as woke. It's just an insult. Stop it. But then from time to time, you do get some people coming out and saying, actually, woke, it just means being alert to injustices. You should be proud to be woke. And the most recent example of this was literally this time last week. I mean, just a week ago, when we had the launch of the police racial action plan, and the woman who was going to be who's responsible for kind of overseeing and making sure that this race action plan properly gets picked up within the police force. So it's kind of mandating things like lessons in Black history for trainee police officers, that police officers will have this awareness of social injustice and kind of basically will become imbibed with critical race theory. And she made this very kind of bizarre but very telling statement with the launch, very defensive statement at the launch, where she's saying, no doubt our officers will be accused of being woke, but that's a good thing. You should be proud if people call you woke. It shows that you're alert to these racial injustices. You should get used to it. You should be proud of it. You're right. It's not often you see that quite so crudely, but clearly there is still a section of this kind of professional managerial class who are the kind of most woke people who are still determined to claim ownership of the label. But you're right, most of them don't, and that's why I kind of quite like using the word, because they don't like it so much.
And what do you think are the main pillars of wokeness?
Well, ideologically, I think it particularly centers around race and gender. So to be properly woke is to believe that you're not a man, I'm not a woman, we're all potentially gender. We shouldn't assume, I shouldn't assume you're a man, you shouldn't assume I'm a woman. We're all kind of on a spectrum. We should all wait to hear a person declare their pronouns before we assume one way or another. We should allow kind of 6'4" men with chests as kind of wide as they are high compete in women's sports, because that's just being kind to the men who want to cheat, not necessarily being kind to the female athletes who've trained for years and years. And a particular set of views around race as well, that we're all kind of inherently racial beings, that there's this kind of structural white superiority, structural black disadvantage and kind of discrimination against black people. And we need to gear kind of the entirety of society around challenging and overcoming these disparities.
And why do you think the whole trans issue has become so central to this? Because, objectively, excuse me, objectively, it's a very small number of people are affected by this. It never used to be an issue at all. I mean, we had trans people before, but and I don't think there was a huge amount of. I mean, there's obviously going to be some discrimination, what have you, but down here near Brighton, we've got a lot of trans people. It wasn't never really a big issue. So, and then in particular, I guess the women's sport thing has become very central to it. So these are really quite niche issues, but it's become, I mean, as soon as I asked you what woke was, you immediately start saying a whole lot of stuff about trans, like it's a central thing. How did that become such a big sort of wedge issue?
No, it's a really, really interesting question. And I don't think there's one straightforward answer, unfortunately. So sorry about that. But I think there's lots of different things coming together. I think some of these kind of, I think when we talk about woke, perhaps I should kind of clarify a little bit. I would kind of break down woke people into two distinct groups. I mean, there's one group, a small group, who I would kind of define as the true believers, if you like, people who are absolutely evangelical and are really driving and pushing forward these views. And then you've got another much larger group who are just kind of wanting a quiet life for themselves, who think that if they hear the words kind of equality and anti-racism, then they take it at face value. That must mean equality and anti-racism, and they just want to go home and kind of have their tea at 6 o'clock and put the kids to bed and not kind of stick their head above the parapet. So it's much easier to kind of hashtag be kind, be nice, go along with this, not raise difficult questions. So I think where the trans thing comes from then is you've got the true believers who are really pushing it through. And I think for them, they see kind of ideas that we have about sex and gender as being really central to the kind of, they would call it, I'm going to use the jargon here, the kind of heteronormative society. So the idea that you have heterosexuality, that the typical kind of family structure is a man, a woman, a couple of kids, and they think that if you can challenge those kind of stereotypical ideas about gender, then you're really striking a blow to the very heart of a kind of patriarchal society with its heteronormativity, with its gender norms. And it kind of strikes me as utterly bizarre when I say it out loud, but you have to read books by kind of Sean Fay, Laurie Penny, even Judith Butler, and you pick up on this idea that they actually think this is going to be a blow to capitalism. They think that by kind of men wearing dresses and women cutting their breasts off, at some point, kind of X number of steps further down the line, the whole of the capitalist system will crumble.
Really? Right.
I mean,
how's that going to work then? Exactly. Do they explain how that works?
Well, because you won't have male and female kind of stereotypes. You won't have heteronormative marriages.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with capitalism, which is just about the free exchange of goods and labor?
Well, totally. But they think capitalism is essentially driven by the patriarchy and by patriarchal norms, and that the way to challenge this kind of patriarch. I mean, it's bullshit. It doesn't. I can't sit here and unfortunately make it make sense, because it doesn't make sense to me. It absolutely doesn't make sense. But in their logic, this is kind of the position that they arrive at. I mean, I'll give you another way, perhaps a clearer way of putting it, is that one of the big central ideological premises of woke thinking is this idea of intersectionality, this idea that everybody can be kind of ranked on some kind of huge chart according to their identity and according to the different kind of disadvantages that they're facing. So I'd be way above you because I'm a woman, but I'd be
right at the bottom. Yeah,
you'd be right at the bottom of the heap. I'd be a bit above you, but then people above me, you know, if a Black, lesbian, transgender, you know, disabled person would be much more at the top of the heap. So when you start creating these intersectional hierarchies, the people who you're putting at the top of this hierarchy, the people who are the most victimized, do then become your particularly transgender women. And it's interesting, you can tell this is true because when you see these protests, particularly in America now, when you see the Black Lives Matter protests going on, you see so many people out there with these placards saying protect Black trans lives, or yes, Black trans lives matter.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier, you know, the proportion of the population that's trans is very, very small. Well, the population of kind of Black trans kind of within that group is smaller still. You know, I'm not suggesting for 1 second we do this, but I'm sure, you know, you could name all the Black trans people in the UK, that it must be that small a number of a cohort that we're talking about. But that group has a particular interest. And obviously, I mean, one of my gripes with all of this, and one of the reasons I feel so strongly about it, is because what this is doing, and the reason why I describe it in the subtitle of my book as a very elitist movement, is because it's completely upturning class politics. I mean, you go back 20, 30 years, the left wing actually had an interest in working class people. Now, when you say, well, the people we're most concerned about are the Black transgender people, they may come from very wealthy, privileged positions in society, but it's because of their identity, the identity boxes that they're ticking. And so when you read people like Laurie Penny and Sean Fay, you know, the link to capitalism then is because they recreate the working class, if you like. They argue that what I would call the kind of the real working class people, they write those people off as gammon, people who actually get their hands dirty, go out to work, maybe have a bit of an uncouth opinion. Well, they're the gammon, they're the racist, sexist, transphobic bigots that these people don't want to have anything to do with whatsoever.
Yeah, they've been a big letdown, haven't they, for the
huge, you know, they probably voted Brexit as well. I mean, it's just disgusting the way those people carried on. So in order to present yourself then as being this anti-capitalist class warrior, having rejected the working class, you need to find a new group that you can champion. And so that in their kind of twisted logic, they present this group of kind of transgender people, particularly Black trans people, you know, they will say, well, they're at a very disadvantaged position in relation to the labour market. You know, they're more likely to be in insecure employment, to be discriminated against in job interviews, to be financially in a less secure position. So it's this particular group that we've got to kind of rally behind and champion, because this group threatens the whole of kind of capitalist hierarchies. But, you know, Chris, as well, talking about this in relation to capitalism, the reason why they might be successful and the reason why they might actually be onto something with this nonsense, you know, and it is nonsense, like I say, is because so many of these capitalist organizations themselves are seemingly happy to go along with this. I mean, it's Pride Month now. I live in Canterbury. If I walk down Canterbury High Street, I can guarantee, you know, every third shop's going to have a rainbow flag or a kind of rainbow display in its window. You could argue it's just queer washing, if that's the term, pride washing.
Yeah.
But this is really central to the way capitalism works nowadays. It seems the kind of this parading of your ethical values.
Yeah, because the big capitalist companies are not particularly interested in the working class either, right? So this becomes a way for them to be on the side of the underdog, but not on the side of necessarily their workers or millions of people.
I think that's right. But I mean, even more insidiously, I would argue it gives them an opportunity to, more than ever, kind of divide and rule in the workplace, to have control of the labour market. I mean, there's very, very few people nowadays work for any kind of, you can't work for the National Health Service or your kind of local council or even, any kind of FTSE 100, FTSE 250, whatever it's called, company, without having to do your equality and diversity training. Without having to be taught all about microaggressions and the importance of not looking at someone the wrong way in a meeting, or not looking at someone in a meeting. Everybody has to submit, it seems, who works for any kind of major corporation has to submit to this. And it really does hand a big benefit to managers when you're able to control kind of where your workers are even looking within meetings, how people are referring to each other.
So you've got this movement which is defending the interests of a really quite small number of people, and the vast majority of people find many of the things they say to be ridiculous. So, how did it win?
Well, I think what it's done so successfully is it's captured nearly every institution in the country. And you see more and more examples of this coming out every day. The civil service, they may have dropped their training relationship with Stonewall, but it's just reported in the Times again, I think about this time last week, that they've had this other organisation coming in, training people up in the correct way to think about gender. It's like schools in particular, universities, the civil service, the National Health Service, the police, the fire service, every major employer, every major public institution, the media, especially the BBC, massively, it has been completely taken over by people who've got this ideological standpoint and are able then to use that position and the power that comes with it to dictate how everybody else should live their lives and kind of think and even feel about certain issues. So I think it's won in the sense that it's kind of become so embedded in all these institutions. Particularly what bothers me is what's going on in schools, the way teachers have got the power essentially to imbue the next generation with these ideas in a very kind of unquestioning way. But I don't think it's full time. I do think we can challenge it.
Yes, well, that's where I wanted to conclude, actually. So the last question, because I'm afraid we're already running up against the clock. Is it doomed? It seems I'm fairly optimistic about this. If you see, for example, the way Netflix came out and told their employers if they don't like freedom of speech, then they should probably look for another job. The Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle stuff is all extremely popular, whereas nobody's watching the woke comedians at all. The women's sport issue, I think, that's got to come to a head, and it's not going to go in favor of the trans athletes, surely, because it's just going to destroy women's sport, right? So are the seeds of its destruction already there?
I hope so, but I'm not complacent. And I don't think it will just eat itself, which, sometimes you hear that said, and I think that's a bit of wishful thinking. I think it can be challenged, but I think we shouldn't be complacent. We've got a big job ahead of us. What gives me optimism is in what you were just saying there, Chris, is not that some Netflix bigwigs have kind of looked at the bottom line and people cancelling their subscriptions and have decided to make a few changes. But when you said, the Ricky Gervais stuff is popular, because that really strikes a chord. The reason why Netflix are making these decisions is not, I don't think for one second, because they really love Ricky Gervais, but because they're aware that this is where the viewers are at, this is going to pull in big numbers of people who want to watch this show. And that shows me that in the general population, woke hasn't won in amongst the people, kind of normal, ordinary people. I know that always risks sounding a bit patronizing, are not woke at all, and don't buy this, recognize it for the kind of bullshit that it is, and are ready to challenge it. And even if that is just sticking Ricky Gervais on Netflix and laughing along with it. But I mean, whenever woke kind of comes up against democracy, comes up against normal people, it loses every single time. Woke candidates don't get generally voted in elections. I guess Biden's maybe the exception to that. But people are not won over, I don't think. It's just that this is being imposed from on high, and unfortunately, I don't think it will eat itself. But if we can stick together and make our voices heard, the people who do challenge this, then I think everything's to play for.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for spending your time speaking to us. So the book is called Why Woke Won. You can get it in what? How? I got it wrong again.
How woke won.
It's all the W's together, I think, is the alliteration of it is appealing to me. How woke won. You can get it in the usual places, Amazon and so on. Very good luck with it. I hope it goes well. I look forward to reading it very soon. To you at home, thanks for joining us. You know the drill. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time for another Swift Hour Snowdon. Don't know who the guest is going to be, but it will be, as ever, a top-class choice. If you want to give us money, go to ia.org.uk/donate or go to the patreon.com/ia London. I'm off on holiday next week. But anyway, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time, or rather, you'll see me. Take care. Thank you. Goodbye.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.